All right. Hello, everybody. My name's Igor. I'm Brastiso president at the moment, and I'm really honored to be here. Thank you, Maggie, for the invitation. Thanks, Felipe. Thanks to the Bahia chapter and to EnproLI for having me here today. I hope this is going to be useful to you somehow. We're going to talk a little bit about teaching pronunciation. I'm not going to be able to keep an eye on the chat, but I will make sure I have 10 minutes in the end at least to answer any questions you may have. Okay? So if you have any questions, use the Q&A feature here and we will talk in the end. Okay? Alternatively, in the last slide, I will give you my email address and my Instagram if you need anything, if you want to discuss anything. If you have any questions, feel free to write to me. So let me start because I don't want to be late and I'm very bad with timing. So I'm going to start so that we don't stay here until midnight. All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about pronunciation. That's the main thing. And I'm going to try and link pronunciation to grammar and vocabulary activities. All right, so first, I'd like to propose a thinking exercise. When I talk about this live, I would ask you to discuss in pairs. But discussing in pairs when we have 914 people online, it's going to be a little bit complicated. So I'd like you to think about this. What aspects of pronunciation do Brazilian learners typically have problems with? I am actually looking at the chat. Oh, no, I'm not, because the chat disappeared. Too bad. I was going to ask you to answer there. Oh, no, it's not. It's here. Is the chat working, Maggie? Say something there, people, in the chat, if you can hear me.
Hey, I'm here.
Is it working? Is the chat working?
No. I just had to shut down the chat because there was
Okay. All right.
too many talks, and we
Okay.
can use Q&A, and I can help you. After
Oh,
you
no
talk, I
problem.
can be the mediator, and I can tell the questions, okay?
Okay.
I can help
Thank you.
you.
All right, Maggie, thanks. Anyway, so it's just a thinking exercise, really. What aspects of pronunciation do Brazilian learners typically have difficulty with? I'm timing here 30 seconds for you to just think about it, and then I'm going to show you my list. So think about it for 30 seconds. What do our Brazilian students typically have difficulty with? Think about it. All right, I actually can see you typing in the Q&A. TH, ED pronunciation, vowels, short and long vowels, minimal pairs, S in plural nouns. Nicole, my daughter's name. What a beautiful name. All right, very good. Thank you very much for your contributions. I have a few ideas here, many of which will be exactly the same as your idea. So ED endings, and this is not the first accidentally. I personally think that this might be the most pervasive difficulty that we Brazilians have when pronouncing English, is mispronouncing ED endings, saying, for example, like it, and loved, called, and etc. But the TH that some of you mentioned, word stress, so things like vegetable and adjective, and etc. Sentence stress, considering that Portuguese and English have pretty different stress patterns at sentence level. Yeah. Epentheses, adding vowel sounds. Well, it's what we normally do. It doesn't have to be vowel sounds, but we typically add vowel sounds to the end of words that end in consonant sounds. So for example, it would be common, it's quite common to hear Brazilian students saying heavy, for example, when they want to say have, five for the number five, and so on. Intonation, yeah, problems with intonation, lack of connected speech, etc. So look, it is not my objective here today to talk about pronunciation being wrong, correct, mistakes necessarily, but let's try and bear in mind that it is important, obviously, that we pronounce English correctly enough or well enough for communication, so that we're always understood. this thinking of students. I think for teachers, perhaps the objective should be a little bit, we should aim a little higher. Yeah? Communication might not be enough, yeah, as we're language models, but for students, perhaps communication is the most important thing. But depending on the error, students might not actually be understood. So it's very important that we as teachers take pronunciation, that we take pronunciation more seriously. Typically, we teachers know quite a bit about grammar, quite a bit about vocabulary, but we tend to not know as much. I'm not saying this is everybody's case, but we tend not to know as much about how pronunciation works. And it's very important that we take this seriously. I'm going to show you, I made 2 notes for myself here. I want to share it here. 2 misconceptions I think that we have sometimes regarding the teaching of pronunciation. 1, pronunciation is advanced. Pronunciation is not advanced. Pronunciation teaching begins at greetings. Basic 1, A1, you're teaching students how to say, hi, my name's Igor, nice to meet you. That's where the teaching of pronunciation begins. My name's Igor rather than my name is Igor, and nice to meet you rather than anyone. You know the mistakes students typically make here with that particular chunk. So pronunciation teaching is not advanced, and it should start the minute you start teaching English to anyone. And the second thing is, perhaps it's a bit, well, actually, I think this is pretty certain, but anyway, you can disagree. But the teaching of pronunciation tends to work best if we don't look at pronunciation as an isolated system. So if we incorporate pronunciation into all the teaching we do. So Julio, before, he mentioned CELTA courses. I work with CELTA courses, and when we're talking about teaching new language, teaching vocabulary, or teaching grammar, we tell teachers that there are 3 things that they need to teach about any new item of language. 3 things, and they are meaning, so students have to know what the new language means. Form, so students need to know how the language is formed. So for example, subject plus auxiliary verb plus, etc. And the third thing is pronunciation. So whenever you're teaching students something new, there has to be pronunciation there. It's meaning, form, and pronunciation. Here's another question. I have a lot of questions. Why do students mispronounce ED endings, for example, which I mentioned? I think it's one of the most common mistakes that we make. I have a few reasons here. One of the reasons, perhaps, and I think, oh Jesus, I went completely red because of the slide. It's quite cool. Perhaps because we do too. Yeah? So perhaps we make that mistake as well. And I think that we need to have a look at our use and check if that is, if we're providing models, speaking specifically about ED, correct models to learn. Perhaps we don't correct them enough. Yeah. So since we understand what they're saying, sometimes, perhaps because we're Brazilian and we know where the mistake is coming from, we don't correct them enough or at all. Perhaps because we think it doesn't make sense for speakers of BP Brazilian Portuguese. Maybe that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult, because in Portuguese, we see a letter E, we pronounce it. And we're not going to have a letter E at the end of the word like that and simply not pronounce it. Yeah? So we don't teach it. That's another reason. And I think one of the most important reasons. When we teach, for example, simple past for the first time, we don't focus enough on pronunciation. We don't focus sufficiently on pronunciation. And then that mistake becomes fossilized. That mistake becomes part of the student's interlanguage. And then later on, it's much more complicated, much more difficult to help them overcome that difficulty. The best place, the best moment to teach pronunciation is when we're teaching something for the first time. That's perhaps the most, it's the optimal moment to teach an item of pronunciation. For instance, I'm going to insist on ED endings because of time. I only have about 40 minutes. I can't really talk about multiple examples, so I decided to pick this one. So if you think of ed endings, there are three possible ways of pronouncing the final ed in English. You have d, t, and id. There are two ways of, at least two ways, of getting students to understand this. One is, I teach them word endings. So I'm going to pronounce the past of the verb, t, the ed, t, every time the verb ends in s, ss, ch, x, blah, 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 blah. D, every time the verb ends in v, l, blah, 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 blah. And whenever the verb ends in t and d, id. That's one way of doing it. It works, but it seems to me it's a lot of things to memorize because it doesn't really make sense that way. It doesn't make sense, logical sense, that when the word ends in s, the past is t. Yeah? If you just present it like that, it doesn't make sense. It makes much more sense, I think, if you teach students the difference between a voiced sound and a non-voiced sound, which is very easy to teach. A voiced sound is basically one that causes your vocal cords to vibrate. So do this exercise. Put your hand on your head like this and say love. Now exaggerate the end. You can feel your whole head vibrate, can't you? So that's voiced. It's a voiced sound. Every time the verb ends in a voiced sound in the present, love, the past is going to be voiced as well. This is the voiced possibility, d. So see how this makes sense. The verb ends in a voiced sound, the past is voiced. Loved, loved. Makes sense. You can understand that. There's something to understand there, not just to memorize. T is the same thing. If the verb ends in an unvoiced sound, like for instance, work, say, put your hand on your head like this and say, there's no vibration, it's just air. Your vocal cords are not working. And the past is because it's also unvoiced. So if the verb ends in an unvoiced sound, the past is unvoiced. Work, worked. Something you can understand as well. You understand the concept of voice. You understand how the past works. And id is the exception, but it's an easy exception to remember because whenever the verb ends in one of these two sounds, you add id. So, need, needed, want, wanted, add, added. Can't think of another verb off the top of my head, sorry. Apparently the chat is alive again. Okay, so sorry, I can't really keep an eye on the chat. Otherwise, I'm just going to go off on a tangent and start talking to you. Sorry about that. We will in the end. I'll give you 10 minutes in the end. So you see, this is something people can understand. So if we understand a little bit more about pronunciation, we understand how it works, we can make a big difference for students' use of the language. And it makes much more sense than to just have students memorize a bunch of terminations that don't make sense. Yeah. So these are the rules. If you want to take a picture of the slide, yeah? So go ahead, you can do it. I know that this is being, oh, sorry about that, people. I know that this is being recorded, but still, if you want to take a picture of the slide for yourself, go ahead and do it. I confess I'm taking a picture of you right now, so smile. Yeah, I know, I can't see you, but anyway, just took a picture. So you see, if the final sound of the verb in its infinitive form is voiced, d. If it's unvoiced, just there, t, which is unvoiced. Then if it ends in one of these two sounds, t or d, the ed will sound id. Yeah, it makes sense. So for instance, when you're teaching simple past, for the first time, this is when you talk about this. It's together with the grammar. It's not one day in the future when the mistakes are fossilized already. So this is, for example, one way of working with a song. This is the song Last Kiss by Pearl Jam. I really love the song. It's not really originally by Pearl Jam, but Pearl Jam made it stupidly famous. And then you have 6 verbs here from the song. So you can have students try and predict. You've already given them the rule. They're going to try and predict what the past form of these verbs will be. So stole ends in l, which is voiced. So the past is d. Swerve ends in v, just like love, voiced. The past, d, and so on. So you have to give students a chance to think about it, to test if the sounds are voiced or invoiced, like z, z. And then they listen to the song to check, and then of course you go over the sounds with them. Yeah? So d, stoled, swerved, t, looked, kissed, missed, id, lifted. I'm a bit anxious. I see there are like 62 messages in the chat. I'm not going to look at them. I have to resist. All right, so you see, it's not something that should be taught in isolation, but something that should come together with the grammar when you're teaching the grammar for the first time. At the beginning here, when I asked you some problems that students typically have with pronunciation, somebody mentioned S ending, so plural, not only plural, but third person singular apostrophe S. So whenever we add a letter S to the verb, to the word, for any reason, understanding the concept of voice will help you with that as well, because, for example, there is the rule of sibilant sound. So if a verb ends, if the word ends in a sound kishia, yeah, so sibilant sound, the S is going to sound is. For example, rose ends in z, roses. Watch, the verb, or watch, the plural of watch, watches. The plural, the third person singular of watch, watches. Apart from that, again, it's voiced and unvoiced. With the exception of the sibilants, if the word ends in an unvoiced sound, for example, stop, the verb stop, the third person singular of stop is stops. So p, unvoiced, s, unvoiced. The third person singular of love, which ends in v, is z. So voiced, voiced, loves. So it's possible to understand, and maybe it's something that we should teach together with plurals. When we teach plural there at the A1 level, or when we teach third person singular again at the A1 level, beginning of A1 level, that's when we should teach S endings to students. It's not advanced. It's not when they're preparing for CPE. No, it's there, the very first time that this is taught. And as you know, S endings, for example, are going to come back many times during the student's studying life. Plural, third person singular, then when you teach present perfect, it's going to happen to has. When you teach apostrophe S, the genitive case, punctuation classes, so you see, then they're going to have the opportunity to look at that several times during their studying life. But every time there has to be good pronunciation work there, effective, thorough, serious pronunciation work there, because that is what ultimately will make a difference to their pronunciation. Not once a semester doing a special pronunciation class once, because you do this once and it's going to have zero impact on their pronunciation. Pronunciation work is to be constant and happen always. All right, so for example, this is another example with grammar. So it's a lesson on simple past. So imagine that this is the lesson. I start by telling a friend, no, by asking my students to tell a friend where they would like to travel and why. Well, at the moment that we cannot go anywhere, traveling anywhere would be good enough. And then tell them that this is my friend John, and in July 2018, actually, it's been brought to my attention. Oh, no, it's correct. Sorry. I fixed it. It's European summer, right? Because you can see that all the pictures of Italy, I mean, everything is really sunny. Originally, I had December here. It didn't make any sense because it would be cold. But anyway, John went to Italy in July, and then I asked my students, so what can you tell me about the Colosseum? What I'm trying to elicit is John didn't go to the Colosseum, he went to the Fontana di Trevi, blah, blah, blah. So you see, by using these ticks and crosses, I can elicit from my students how much they already know about the form. See, this is a grammar class. It's very focused on grammar. But then at the end of this, I'm going to give them a board record. Yeah, I'm going to write the structure on the board. And then look at this. Look at what I'm proposing we focus on. The form, obviously. Yeah. But why do you think these bits here are highlighted in yellow? These are all important elements of pronunciation. So I'm teaching grammar, yes. But look, John traveled to Rome. The D that disappears, travel to Rome, travel to Rome. The weak form of these grammatical words. He didn't go to the Colosseum. He didn't go to the Colosseum. If you're only going to remember one thing from this talk, remember this. The most important reason why we teach pronunciation is not to improve student speaking, is to improve students listening. Because I can control the rate of my delivery. I can control how fast or how slowly I speak. So if I say he did not go to the Colosseum, it's fine. You understand what I'm saying. But I cannot control the rate of delivery. I cannot control the speed of my interlocutor. I cannot control the speed at which you speak. So I really need to be able to understand connected speech, weak forms, contractions, because I cannot control how fast you're going to speak, how fast the series on Netflix are going to be, how fast my favorite singer is going to sing. So I'm teaching third person singular, for example. I need to make my students aware of the fact that while it's not a problem if they say, if I had gone to the party, I would have seen her, that they need to be able to understand, if I'd gone to the party, I would have seen her. If I'd gone to the party, I would have seen her. Because this is probably how, certainly actually how, many speakers will talk to them. So I'm not saying my student necessarily needs to talk like that, but what I'm saying is that my student needs to be able to understand that. Yeah? So we need to focus on pronunciation, if for nothing else, to improve our students' pronunciation, because we do not control the speed at which our interlocutors speak. Yeah. So let's focus more on, for example, here, went to, rather than went to, or went to, as our Brazilian students could say it. And maybe if they say he went to the Sistine Chapel, they would be understood. So maybe that's not a big deal, but they need to be able to understand he went to the Sistine Chapel, he went to the Sistine Chapel, because this is what's going to happen. In another talk I gave recently, I used as an example a sentence a student of mine had a problem with. And the sentence was very simple. The sentence was, she works in an office. If I had written that sentence on the board for my student, he would have had no problems to understand it. Zero problems. It was a very simple sentence. She works in an office. And he might say, no, not anymore. He's much better now. But at the time, he might have said, she works in an office. And we know it's common for students to speak like that, pronouncing all the vowels they can see. But even if he speaks much more slowly and he does not have all of these connections and the weak forms and everything, it's very important that he's able to understand she works in an office, she works in an office, she works in an office, because this is going to happen, and this is going to happen quite frequently. Yeah? So we need to prepare our students to understand authentic English. And how do we do that? One of the ways is teaching pronunciation, not once or twice a year, but absolutely every class, every grammar point we teach, every item of vocabulary we teach. Yeah? So you see that in my lesson, this is my lesson plan. It's here. Pronunciation, drilling, done individually and in small groups, important elements of connected speech, highlighted and drilled. So Repeat. Repeat after me. Repeat after me. Repeat again. Repeat after me. All right. Sorry, I talk too much, don't I? It's just a lesson plan. All right. I'm almost done, I promise. Not going to be late, I think. So how about vocabulary? It's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. So I'm teaching colors. I can have my students match the new words to their phonemic transcription. Phonemic transcription? Seriously? Yes, seriously. Look, when we're teaching colors, a word students commonly mispronounce is color itself. Yeah. And I have a problem that my daughter comes into my office and she steals my markers. But I found one. I have a few markers hidden from her. So color, yeah? Look, imagine I tell my students that this is the phonemic transcription of the word cut. I'm not asking students to transcribe anything. I'm doing it for them. This is cut. A word that most students pronounce correctly, right? And then I show them, look, this is color. Do you think they can see? Do you think that it's clear that it's the same sound? Of course it is. So I'm not saying let's teach phonemic symbols to students, let's get them to, well, I am actually saying that. What I'm not saying is let's teach students to transcribe words. No, that's not a graduation in linguistics, is it? But if they can understand, if they can associate symbols that represent difficult sounds, if they can associate those to the correct pronunciation, the ones that they have difficulty with, to their correct pronunciation, we can make pronunciation visual. Yeah? And by pointing at a good model like this, like the in cut, I can perhaps get my students to pronounce color correctly. And we can show them, for example, that I'm trying to think of a color that ends in a consonant sound and that students tend to add a vowel sound to. Black. So they might say blackie, 2 syllables. Yeah. So if I show them the phonemic transcription, I can ask them, see, I'm not asking them to transcribe anything. I'm just going to ask them, can you see a vowel here at the end of the word? Is there a vowel there? Can you see this E at the end? No. What is the last sound you can see? And you know what the phonemic symbol is for the sound? It's a letter K. Yeah, it's not, it's basically, it's a letter. So drawing students' attention to that might get them to notice that you don't really have a vowel sound there at the end. So this can be a very useful exercise. Then mark every new word on the board for stress. Get students to notice stress, understand how word stress goes. Students ask you how to say whatever in English. Write it on the board, mark it for stress. How do you do that? It's actually, well, there are many ways, but a very simple one is, so the students ask you how to say, I don't know, cellular in English. And you say, cell phone, and you do this. You see, every time you write a word on the board, I think this is actually together, my bad. Cell phone, cell phone, cell phone, with the stress on the first syllable. You make a point, you make a habit of writing like this on the board. And then hopefully very soon students will be writing in their notebooks like that as well. And that's it. We have just taught them to notice stress. And hopefully from that point on, they're going to notice stress and they're going to note and mark stress for every new word they learn. Discuss rules with learners. For example, OUS, people, you see OUS at the end of the word? That's it. Famous, stupendous, glorious. There's no such thing as O's. It's us. Yeah? So teach them rules. Get them to notice these things. Instead of giving them pronunciation, refer them to the dictionary so that they can learn from the phonemic transcription, or they can learn that, for example, Cambridge Dictionary speaks to you, and all you need to do is click on the sound icon and they can hear the word pronounced. But the thing is, we absolutely need to make sure that we teach pronunciation frequently, diligently, thoroughly. so that students understand little by little, class after class, that pronunciation is vital, that pronunciation is essential. And I'm not talking about speaking only, at least. Pronunciation is what makes it possible for you to understand what you're listening to. So even if you cannot pronounce things in a certain way, you need to be aware of the fact that things are pronounced a certain way so that you can understand it. Yeah? So, as promised, this is my email address. This is me on Instagram. Yeah, I'd love to interact with you there. And for Brass Tiso Matters, this is Brass Tiso's website. I don't know if you're familiar with Brass Tiso, but I hope you are at this point. We're a huge teachers association. It's the Brass Tiso. Brass Tiso means Brazilian Association of Teachers of English to Speakers of Other Languages. And this is us on Instagram. All right. So it's my email address, my Instagram, and the Brass Tiso information. I want to thank you very much for your patience. I think in the end, I ended up speaking very, very fast. I apologize. But now I'm open for questions. So can we do a few questions then, Megan?
Hey, we just have 5 minutes. So can you go to Q&A and choose one or two to answer? Or do you want me to choose? Can you do that?
I was really supposed to start at 7:10, right? I'm not late, right? Okay.
Oh my God, I'm sorry.
No,
Yeah,
but don't worry. I'm just checking. I hate being late, and I'm always late.
I'm sorry. Okay, too late. You got 15 minutes almost.
No, but I'm not going to use all that. I'm not going to use all that.
Okay.
Just look at
If
some
you
of
don't
the
use it, I'm gonna talk about Brass Tiso by your chapter.
All right. By the way, what a beautiful chapter. I look forward to a time in which it's going to be possible for me to go there again. Hopefully very soon.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see. What do you think would be a good approach to specific pronunciation tips later? Right. I mean, we cannot go back and start from the beginning with every student, right? I mean, we can only start from the moment we meet them for the first time. But from that point on, it's important that every new item of language that we teach, that we do sound, thorough pronunciation work, and then we deal with whatever else is a problem in their pronunciation, little by little, slowly. So, for example, they're doing an activity in which they're talking to peers, you're making notes. You would normally do that, make notes of the mistakes that they're making with grammar, with pronunciation, with grammar, with vocabulary. Then we add pronunciation things that we want to discuss with them in the end. Yeah? And we do this diligently, always looking at ways of getting them to notice pronunciation. For example, something we haven't talked about here today, but the L sound is very difficult for Brazilians, isn't it? Because we don't pronounce it. I mean, our generation doesn't pronounce it anymore in Brazilian Portuguese, almost at all. So, for example, alto, assim, automóvel, and alto, the opposite of baixo, we pronounce it exactly the same way. And then when students look at will, they will say will and bill in Italian. So getting them to notice this and hopefully little by little get them to pronounce this correctly, or at least to notice and understand it, is very important. So little by little, we cannot change everything overnight. It's impossible. But what we can do overnight is change the way we look at pronunciation. And tomorrow, in our first class tomorrow morning, to try and get students to notice and to think of pronunciation as much as possible. Yeah. Do you think that in English as a lingua franca, we may not focus on pronunciation, but on comprehension? But I think they're the same thing, Evelyn, depending on the point of view. And you have to think of comprehension also as a two-way street, right? Because I need to understand you, but you have to understand me as well. And although obviously native speakers are not the models anymore, and the native speaker is a difficult term anyway, because native speaker from where? But I still want to speak to Americans. I still want to speak to Irish people. I still want to speak to Scottish people, and I always will. So it is important that the way I speak is understandable for them as well. So it's not just about Oh yes, we say you, but that's okay because Brazilians can understand, right? But can everybody understand that? If I say will, if I say bill rather than bill and will. So no, we should not have any native accent as the model. We should think of pronunciation of English as an international language, as a lingua franca, absolutely. But remember that this works two ways. It's not just uh, um, getting to understand what people say, but we want them to understand us as well. Yeah. How can teachers learn more about pronunciation? Unfortunately, or fortunately, or factually, Yasmin, there's only one answer to that: studying. Yeah? That's the only way. If I can recommend a book, I think a good book to start is a book called Sound Foundations by Adrian Underhill. I'm going to write in the chat. I don't know if I can, but I'm going to try to write in the chat. I'm going to write here in the chat. Oh, sorry, I'm only sending this to you. Okay, Sound Foundations, Adrian Underhill. Also, Adrian Underhill has a lot of great videos on YouTube that you can watch, especially one that is 1 hour long and called Introduction to Phonology Complete, something like that. That one is a very good introduction to phonemic symbols, for example. Adriane asks, is it necessary to have contact with a variety of accents? Absolutely, absolutely. But not just Canadian, American, Australian, but Brazilian, French, Japanese, Chinese, Italian. It's very important to expose our students to as many accents as possible, definitely. I'm not going to touch on that, Mariana, if you forgive me. You're asking me about the connection between pronunciation and cultural identity. I can't really say I'm a specialist in that, and I'm not going to go into a topic that I might just ruin by saying, I can't say what I was going to say. But anyway, I do think, for example, I'm not going to answer your question directly, but maybe this will shed some light on what I think. I'm Brazilian. I'm ridiculously proud of being Brazilian. I don't want to sound anything other than Brazilian. Yeah? So I'm Brazilian. Any biodata you see of mine, anywhere, in any context, the second thing right after my name is going to be a Brazilian teacher and teacher trainer. It's the first thing it'll say. Huh? But I also think I need to sound as, sorry, for lack of a better word, I'm just going to use good, if you forgive me, but as possible, because of my profession and because I want to get my students to also sound as acceptable as possible in an international context. So perhaps my answer to that would be love your accent, embrace your accent, but let's understand perhaps that vegetable is incorrect word stress, not accent. You know? So I don't think correction and loving your accent, I don't think that these are two concepts that can all work together. I think they can work together. The importance of pronunciation in communication, absolutely vital, vital. Because I need to pronounce things in a way that you can understand me, regardless of where you or I are from. And I have to understand what you're saying as well. So that's not just down to pronunciation. Obviously, grammar, vocabulary, and many other things will play a part. But pronunciation is absolutely vital. I mean, besides it, thank you, V. Teachers were looking for improving their pronunciation skills. Online, you can read Sound Foundations, but find Adrian Underhill online. Find YouTube channels online that you can learn pronunciation from. Yeah? And but I think something that helps very much is noticing, being able to notice language. So when you're watching Netflix, when you're watching TED Talks, when you're exposed to English, pay attention to how things are pronounced and try and imitate. But I mean, as teachers, it's very important to read about pronunciation so that we understand how it works. Yeah? Difficult issues The British American accent, I don't think, Maria de Conceição, perhaps we should be discussing British and American accent that much. I mean, there's so many accents the students need to be exposed to. And there are some generalizations we make that are not even true. For example, British accent is the one where we don't pronounce the letter R after vowel sounds, but there are British accents that will, and there are American accents that won't. So I think we should think of as many accents as possible rather than just American and British. How to deal with fossilized pronunciation problems. Eleni, there isn't an easy answer for that. It's diligent work. As we'd say in Portuguese, trabalho de formiguinha, to work on pronunciation every class. And students insist on saying will, and you insist on correcting that it's will. And then next class you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. Unfortunately, there is no other way. People, I really think I am running out of time, and I'm really, really sorry about that. I would love to talk to you until midnight or something, but I actually have a class in an hour, so it's impossible. So get in touch with me if you want to talk a little bit more about pronunciation. And I want to finish by thanking EnproLI and Brastiço Bahia very, very, very much for having me. It's been an honor. And honestly, I don't think I have ever spoken to so many people at the same time in my career. So thank you for that. I don't think I've ever spoken to 900 people together before. So thank you. Thank you for having me. And I hope to see you around. I really hope very soon we're going to be able to meet, to be actually in the same physical space so that I can give you a hug, Maggie, for the invitation. Yeah. Thank you very much. Felipe, fantastic work. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to disappear so that you can continue now. Thank you very much. Bye, everyone. See you.